Anytime you don't make the playoffs, it's a failure.
Joe Burrow is one of the best quarterbacks in today's NFL, and this season he joined a rare but unfortunate group, becoming the third quarterback to throw 40 touchdown passes and miss the playoffs, joining Dan Marino and Drew Brees as the only two to do so. After suffering a season-ending injury in 2023, many, including myself, hated to see the greatness of Joe Burrow not on full display. So this year was a time for him to recapture the spotlight he gained in 2022. With a season that was almost identical to that Super Bowl appearance. However, after yet another slow start to the season, the Bengals have not won their first game of the season since 2021. But why did this season in particular end without a playoff appearance? Is it as simple as Joe Burrow having a bad defense, or did he play a part in his own demise? Is this season overrated by many who believe Joe Burrow is the MVP, or at least in the conversation if he had made the playoffs? Let's attempt to answer those questions by looking at key moments in the season where they had success, but the team as a whole ultimately underperformed. It all started in week 1 against the Patriots in the most disappointing game offensively for the Bengals, generating only 10 points on the day. Now, this was Joe Burrow's first game since injury, so rust was to be expected. We will also see Gerard Mayo get his first win as the coach of the Patriots before later being fired at the end of the season. The Bengals as a whole, though, looked ill-prepared and out of sync, as I now question how prepared Zach Taylor actually has his team, as they consistently start slow. I honestly believe a lot of this could be fixed if teams would take the time and actually play a drizzle of preseason action. Wait, Joe Burrow tried to, but I digress. For a team that cannot win the first game of the season, you would think that might be a good idea. Tackles were being missed left and right, which led to 170 yards rushing, but even with that being the case, the Patriots only scored 16 points, which isn't much. The Bengals offense scored its first points of the game in the second half, mainly due to a turnover in the red zone in the second quarter because you decided for some odd reason to carry the ball like a loaf of bread. You also add another fumble on a punt return, both leading to field goals. The offensive line did not have a great showing as well, and just know that particular unit does not get better much throughout the rest of the season. So now the Bengals sit at a whopping 0-1. With Kansas City waiting for another showdown, the game as a whole wouldn't disappoint, even though the Bengals would have loved a different outcome, as we see the Chiefs would win on a walk-off field goal. So as we rewind, let's look at a few disastrous moments. A fumble from Joe Burrow that led to 6, and the defense being unable to stop Kansas City late cost the Bengals the game down the stretch to give them their back-to-back losses for another 0-2 season. Next up is a matchup against a young QB and previously bad team in the Washington Commanders. This would have been what you wanted to get out of an 0-2 hole, but as we would see, the Commanders were much improved from last year. 324 yards, 3 touchdowns would not be enough, as the Commanders put up a whopping 38 points against the Bengals defense. So let's try this again. With a matchup coming up against a team we thought was going to be bad coming into the season, is just what the Bengals need to get out of this funk. And okay, finally, a good job. They would get their first win of the season against the Panthers to start off the season 1-3. The defense did give up 5 yards a carry, but that did not hurt them, as they would go on to win this game with a very important matchup coming up against the Ravens next that finished in an overtime thriller. 392 passing yards, 5 touchdowns, 38 points. Sounds like a recipe for a win in most cases in the NFL. However, for the Bengals, it wouldn't be. With 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, up 10, you have to close the deal. But after this stiff arm from Lamar Jackson, something told me it just might be the Ravens' day. And as soon as it looked like the Bengals had the game-sealing drive, Joe Burrow would make a costly mistake, an interception to set up the game-tying field goal for overtime. But it wasn't quite over yet. Lamar would fumble the ball at midfield, and Zach Taylor would run the ball 3 times for a long field goal, and as we know, that did not work, and the Ravens would go on to win. Did the defense defense played poorly? Yes. But did Joe Burrow have a key mistake with the game hanging in the balance? Yes, he did. Zach Taylor play calling down the stretch was also shaky. So with all of that, all you really can do is move on to the next game, man. That's what they did. Back-to-back wins against the Giants and the Browns, who are just awful at this point, before running into the Eagles, and it was bad. The running game was even more non-existent than before. Jamar Chase would be kept relatively in check. No T. Higgins. The defense gave up 37 points, even though Philly did not score a single time in the first quarter. And although Burrow did not play bad, he was just another guy on this particular day. 234 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception in a game that was closer than it seemed until this 4th and 1 play. It was in the third quarter, which was the turning point of the ball game. You get a forced throw from Burrow to Chase, which leads to a pick, and it's pretty much over with at this point. They would go on to take out their frustrations though against the Raiders 41-24 in an absolute beatdown. Burrow had 5 touchdowns, 1 interception for 251 yards. And if you are the Bengals, you would hope to build on this momentum, but they proceeded to have their second 3-game losing streak of the season. In all 3 games, Burrow went for at least 300 yards with a 400-yard performance against the Ravens. However, the defense would give up at least 34 points in all 3 games. So even with Burrow and the passing game playing great, they could not overcome the defensive struggles. I do want to point out one thing though. If I'm going for 2 like they did against the Ravens here, I'm throwing the ball to Jamar Chase unless the entire team covers. A 264-yard, 3-touchdown game from Jamar Chase, wasted. But it is what it is. Now we get to the part of the season where most Bengal fans have lost hope. The team is sitting at 4-8 and their playoff chances look all but over. However, the wins would begin to roll in. 369 yards against the Cowboys, 271 yards against the Titans. The Browns are still bad. And with that, we get to the 2 most important games of the season, right after the defense gives up its lowest total of the year. Maybe the Bengals finally hit a stride as a unit with some true momentum going into the game against the Broncos. Momentum that was put into question after this late Bo Nix touchdown pass to send the game into overtime. But unlike their last overtime attempt, the Bengals will come out on top. 412 yards, 3 touchdowns from Joe Burrow, leaving one team and some help from others in the way of their playoff hope. And once again, they would deliver. Not the greatest game from Joe Burrow, not the best defensive performance I've seen from the Bengals, but it was a collective effort from a squad that wanted to keep their playoff hopes alive as they would finish off the season with the win over the Steelers. But was a 9-8 record good enough, needing a Kansas City win and a Miami Dolphins loss?
32-20 win. The first time an Andy Reid team in Kansas City has been shut out.
So that's it. It's over. A 4,913 yard, 43 touchdown season, leading the league in both categories with just 9 interceptions type of a season won't see the playoffs at all. And with hindsight being 2020, the Bengals season in a way ended with that loss to a less talented Patriots team all the way in week 1. But as far as blame goes for the rest of the season, was the biggest issue the defense? I believe so. But does all of it 100% lie with them? No, not really. They could have easily laid down during that 5-game winning streak, but they did not. Well, who else is to blame? The 29th ranked offensive line didn't help, which makes what Joe Burrow did that much more impressive. With most teams in the playoffs having a highly rated offensive line, the bad O-line didn't help the running game either. On top of that, they lacked explosive playmakers in the backfield. The Bengals need help in many areas, the defense being the #1 concern, but not the only concern, with Trey Hendrickson being one of the only bright spots, which is why the coaching staff on that side of the ball is now gone. The lack of defense meant the offense had to be perfect throughout a game on many nights with no room for mistakes. And in key moments, there were mistakes made. Clock and game management in certain spots were also an issue. Joe Burrow is a great quarterback, and with a better team around him, he is going to be successful. But there are questions to answer. Will T. Higgins be back? Will the young defensive guys pan out? Can you shore up the offensive line, which will make it easier to establish a running running game? I'm not sure, but what I do know is the Bengals have the most important thing, and that's Joe Burrow, who would be in the conversation for MVP if it was not for a disappointing beginning and end to the season. He is just that good, and I can see him one day winning that MVP and a Super Bowl, and it's not crazy to say that it could potentially be in the same season, similarly to someone else who has done this before in the modern era, as he has put himself in a completely different class that many quarterbacks today are trying to catch up to. If you're interested in the year Mahomes entered the GOAT debate, click right here.